Welcome to You Have My Sword. This week's episode, we are talking about communication, but it's less talking about your feelings and more spying on your enemies. Let's talk about it. We are talking about the Palantiri. The Palantiri, which are also known as Seeing Stones or the Seven Stones, were spherical stone objects used for communication in Middle-earth. Looking into a palantir allowed one to communicate with anyone else looking into another such stone. In addition, beings of great power, like Sauron, could manipulate the stones to see virtually any part of the world. There were 8 distinguished ones in total. I'm sure you're like, okay, so there are 8, why are they called the Seven Stones? That's because the 8th is essentially a master stone, sort of akin to how the One Ring is amongst the other rings. Tolkien described the stones as made of a dark crystal, indestructible by any normal means, except perhaps the fire of Mount Doom. They ranged in size from a diameter of about a foot to much larger stones that could not be lifted by one person. The stone of Osgiliath, which was the capital of Gondor, had power over other stones, including the ability to eavesdrop. The stones had permanent poles aligned with the center of the earth, with permanent upper and nether poles. The circumferential faces were the ones that allowed viewing and receiving outside visions and channeling them to the eye of the beholder on the opposite side. So, if one wished to look east, he would essentially place himself on the western side of the orb, etc. Unlike the master stones, which could rotate and look in any direction, the smaller ones had fixed positions so that when looked at from a wrong direction, the face would appear blank to the surveyor. Also worth noting, the Palantiri could not transmit sound. They could only show visions or intended thoughts of the user. This can be confusing since they're often referred to as communication devices. Now, the more minor stones required one to move around them, thereby changing the viewpoint of its vision, whereas the major stones could be turned on their axis. In one direction, they could see for leagues, with the farthest places offering the least amount of clarity. Their vision was not based on obstacles, but on darkness. They could see through things, but would only see shadow, essentially. Nothing within could be discerned. This was a method of security which protected the sight of the surveyor. Magnification was also possible for those with an extraordinary will. Only the most potent and determined could accomplish this. Palantiri could not pierce minds, for the transference of thought depended upon the wills and intentions of those communicating. When 2 stones were communicating with each other, then another viewer from a third stone would find them blank. The master stones of north and south were able to eavesdrop, essentially, on these mental conversations, however. Some stones were attuned to each other, for example, the Ithil stone and the Aenos stone, as these belonged to the brothers Isildur and Anarion and were mounted in sister cities, so they had kind of like a connection there. For those of you old enough to remember landlines, this reminds me of being 13 and secretly 3-way calling a girl you don't really like while the other girl remains quiet on the other line while you try to get the other girl to talk shit about the girl pretending she isn't on the line. Then your friend confronts her in Mr. Harrison's 8th grade history class the next day, but he's an alcoholic and doesn't notice because he fell asleep during the video of the creation and ratification of the Constitution and Bill of Rights he put on so he could take a whiskey nap. According to Gandalf, it is beyond Sauron and Saruman's skill to create the Palantiri, and that Sauron cannot make the Palantiri lie or create false images, although actually the latter could show selective images to foster a false impression in the viewer. So while it cannot show a false image, it only shows the truth, it can kind of be reworked in a way to kind of show selective imagery, which can kind of be used to confuse or manipulate. The Palantiri were made by the Noldor in Eldamar, likely by Feanor himself during his time in Aman in the Time of Trees, and then given by the elves to the faithful Númenóreans, who kept them as heirlooms until the fall of Númenor during the late Second Age. We all remember the fall of Númenor, right? I literally can't stop talking about how dumb men are. Anyways, 7 of those stones were rescued and brought to Middle-earth by Elendil and his sons and set in well-guarded towers throughout the realms in exile. Now, for context, Elendil, whose name literally means elf friend, also known as Elendil the Tall or Elendil the Fair, or his elven street name Veranda, which means the faithful, was a man of Númenor who led the survivors of its downfall to the shores of Middle-earth, where they founded the 2 realms in exile, Arnor in the north and Gondor in the south. Thus, Elendil became the first king of both realms and also held the title of the first High King of the Dunedain, which made him the supreme overlord of all exiled Númenóreans in the lands to the east of the Great Sea. He is a good example of the only time I'll ever say not all men, because that is a good-ass man. Anyways, the Dunedain placed the stones across Middle-earth to communicate with one another. The stones were placed in Annúminas, Weathertop, Elostirion, also known as Tower Hills, in the north, Osgiliath, Orthanc, and Isengard, Minas Ithil, and Minas Anor in the south. Oh my god, that is a lot of words. There was a Master Stone separate from the 7, which resided in Tol Eressëa in the Tower of Avalon. Now, 4 of the stones are known to have been lost. The chief stone of the north at Amansul and the stone from Annúminas were lost with Arvedú, who was the 15th and last king in Arthedain, thought to likely be lost in the cold northern seas somewhere. That's a lot of words and a lot of really hard words to pronounce. So essentially, these stones just went missing over time and are thought to just be at the bottom of an ocean somewhere near that kingdom. The chief stone of the south in Osgiliath was lost in the Kinstrife. The stone of Minas Ithil was captured by Sauron and very likely destroyed in the destruction of Barad-dûr. So when the Dark Tower fell, we can assume that we lost that Palantir as well. The stone of Elostirion was taken back to the Undying Lands on the Ringbearer's ship. So when the Ringbearers fucked off to the Undying Lands, they brought that Seeing Stone with them. Only the stones of Minas Anor and Orthanc remained in Middle-earth, yet the stones of Minas Anor got fucked up, showing all but the most strong-willed, the burning hands of Denethor II. So it's safe to say that that stone, for some reason, became corrupted and is just well and truly cursed at this point. Imagine picking that bitch up and like looking into it, and it's just the burning hands of Denethor. No fucking thank you. Okay, so the Palantiri were most readily used by the heirs of Elendil, as well as those appointed to guard them. The stones responded best to those with the right to use them, hence Denethor's ability to utilize the stone of the White City very easily, whereas Saruman, in true boomer fashion, struggled with its use. Saruman's like, how do I get the fucking Wi-Fi to work on this thing? During the War of the Ring, the Palantiri were used by all sorts of fuckers across Middle-earth. Sauron used the Ithil Stone to take advantage of the users of the other 2 stones, the Orthanc Stone and the Anor Stone, but was also susceptible to deception himself. So Sauron was not so powerful that these stones could not deceive even him. So when Saruman used the Orthanc Stone, Sauron convinced him to join with him. Saruman is so weak. I honestly can't with him sometimes. When I think about Saruman, I'm just like, man, what a fucking bitch baby. My guy answers like one cold call from the Dark Lord and was like, yeah, actually, I should revisit my car's extended warranty. He's really onto something here. Oh my god. Okay, so Denethor, the last steward of Gondor, attempted to use the Honor Stone in his later years to gain knowledge, but too often only saw what Sauron wished him to. So here's a good example of Sauron showing him things that are real because he can't create fake images, but he's showing select images in a way that can manipulate the mind. Sauron convinced Denethor over time that there was no hope for victory. For context, Denethor's Palantir was located in a chamber of the White Tower above Minas Tirith's throne room. Denethor thought at first he had the might to stand against Sauron, and for some time was able to withstand Sauron's power mentally, but was aged prematurely as a result. But upon seeing in full the advance of Sauron's armies in the days leading up to the siege of Gondor, Denethor turned to complete despair and was determined then to be burned on a pyre instead of mounting a, in his mind, hopeless defense of Minas Tirith. Gandalf suspected his possession of a Palantir after obtaining the Orthanc Stone was not proved until Denethor displayed it to him and Pippin in the Hollows when his pyre had been prepared. A week beforehand, Pippin mistakenly used the Orthanc Stone, unwittingly fooling Sauron into believing that he, Pippin, had the One Ring. Aragorn later deliberately used the Orthanc Stone to distract Sauron and display his identity to him, providing Frodo the opportunity to traverse the plains of Gorgoroth to complete his quest and causing Sauron to rush forward his plans to attack Gondor. Aragorn was able to wrench the stone to his will and learned of the threat approaching from the south. So again, another good example of how you can use the Palantiri as intended, but manipulate it in such a way that you can kind of confuse the surveyor into believing something that isn't quite correct. Okay. Where are we? Let's go through some media depictions of the stones. So, The Return of the King, and I'm talking about the 1980 animated film. In the Rankin Bass adaptation of The Return of the King, Denethor was shown to have a Palantir. In it, he has seen that a black fleet of ships was sailing from the east up the river Anduin, believing it to be the Devil's Armada. However, he failed to realize this before his demise, that it in fact was Aragorn leading those ships. Yeah, that's a fucking bummer for him. Okay, so the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you guys probably are akin to this. In Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings films, extended editions included, the Palantiri seen are those of Orthanc and Minas Ithil, depicted as roughly the size of a softball, with a smooth appearance of quartz. The Honor Stone is not revealed to be possessed by that of Denethor. However, he states, "Do you think the eyes of the White Tower are blind? I have seen more than you know." And this is referring to his use of the Palantir. So we don't see it, but he alludes to it. Now, the Orthanc Stone is revealed in the Fellowship of the Ring to be in Saruman's possession when Gandalf consults him regarding the One Ring, and in turn discovers that he is in league with Sauron. Later, Saruman uses the Palantir to commit Isengard to Sauron's war effort, and Sauron commands him to build an army worthy of Mordor. The Orthanc Stone isn't seen again until the early scenes of The Return of the King, at the arrival of the company from Helm's Deep, when Pippin notices it lying in the shallow waters outside Orthanc and retrieves it. But Gandalf quickly demands that he hand it over. Later, in Edoras, Pippin is haunted by his initial encounter with the Palantir and sneaks it out of Gandalf's possession to see it again. This time, Sauron is waiting and attacks Pippin's mind. Luckily, Pippin does not give him information about Frodo or the ring. That scene, obviously, we probably know it well. Incredibly stressful, and Pippin, historically a dumbass, right? A beloved dumbass, but a dumbass nonetheless. But Like we talked about earlier, he actually did a good thing by fucking with the Palantir because it then made Sauron believe that he was the ring bearer and not Frodo. Now, the final use of the Palantir is shown in the extended edition of the film following the Battle of Pelennor Fields when Aragorn retrieves it in the throne room of Minas Tirith, where he confronts Sauron and reveals himself to be the heir of Elendil and to own the reforged sword of Anduril. So, Sauron is holding another Palantir in his hand, presumed to be that of Minas Ithil. Sauron attempts to weaken Aragorn's resolve by revealing Arwen's fading life, which in turn causes Aragorn to drop the brooch Arwen gave him, shattering it on the throne room floor. Under Saruman's use, a haze can be seen swirling about inside of it. When Gandalf throws a cloth over it, his brief contact reveals that the user on the other end is indeed Sauron, having briefly glimpsed the Eye of Sauron itself. Later, when Pippin uses the Palantir, the Eye of Sauron is fully revealed and gives off a fiery glow, seeming to bind Pippin's hands to the orb. The same phenomenon occurs with Aragorn's use of the Palantir, although his hands do not seem bound to it. This can mean a million things. I don't believe that this happens in the book, but because it is Sauron, he is the Dark Lord, he is powerful. Pippin likely very easily corrupted, succumbed to the power of Sauron viewing him through the Palantir and binded his hands, but Aragorn's will was likely too strong to have that happen to him. Now, some video game depictions. In The Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth II, The Rise of the Witch King, the chief Palantir of the North was used to protect fortifications and settlements in Arnor. Although this is also used as a weapon, it is peculiar to the game's plot and is not from the books. In Middle-earth Shadow of War, which fucking rips if you haven't played it, a Palantir is the main objective of the assault of Minas Ithil, now known as Minas Morgul. The stone was guarded by Gondor troops and their general Castamir, but was given to the Witch King of Angmar as payment for the general's daughter's freedom. The Seeing Stone was then safeguarded in Minas Morgul by the Nazgul, then taken by Talion after he assaults the city. Yeah, that was probably a lot. It's not canon, but I highly suggest anybody that plays video games to play Shadow of War. And honestly, the Battle for Middle-earth 2, not so bad either. Give them a shot. Okay, and we have actually some fun facts. The sigil stones in the Elder Scrolls, Oblivion, and Skyrim, as well as the Elder Scrolls Online, could be a reference to the Seeing Stones having a very similar appearance and purpose. And I actually did some research here, and while it's not super confirmed, it is kind of confirmed by people that worked on the game that the sigil stones were indeed inspired by the Palantir in Lord of the Rings. So that is very cool. Also, there is a technology company named Palantir, which builds data integration and analysis software, and it is very clearly named after the Palantiri, and their logo is modeled after a Palantir. So very heavily inspired. No beating around the bush there. Very cool name for a company. Congrats, guys. Okay, whatever. And I think honestly that concludes the episode. You can go to youhavemyswordpodcast.com to find our socials and any other relevant information. You can use the contact form to ask me questions, send me hate mail. I am streaming on Twitch at twitch.tv/Krysti Pryde. You can find me there, hang out with me, ask me questions. We do talk a lot about fantasy and Lord of the Rings. I have been making a lot of chainmail on stream. Sometimes I play video games, but people don't seem very into that. So I usually just do chatting or just construct chainmail and other miscellaneous stuff. So yeah, you can come hang out with me there. And as always, you can join my Discord. But yeah, you have my sword, and thank you so much. I'll see you in the next.
Edgeworks Nebula.